Now, we've discussed the mess before, haven't we? That we're all in because of Labor's economic policies or lack thereof. But what's just as damaging is their emissions obsession. What's made it all worse is the chance of a hung parliament now being very much in play. We could have the Teals as kingmakers, not just the Greens. And the Teals want to take things even further and set a 2035 target of 75%. Joining me now to discuss this and more, Sky News contributor Chris Uhlmann. Well, I tell you what, it could be Labor and the Greens in a hung parliament. It could be Labor with the Teals. Or in the worst possible worlds, Chris, it could be a combination of all three. So tell us why the Teals deserve greater scrutiny over their climate demands.
Because they're all care and no responsibility, Peter, because they don't actually have to make work in the real world, the things that they try and greenwash in front of press conferences. Let's just take one example of what they're doing to force up prices for poor people who don't mostly live in the electorates in which they are candidates. And that is on the Australian Energy Market Operator's plan for 82% renewables by 2030. Now, in order to do that, we need 15 gigawatts of gas. The system will not function, Peter, without that gas there because it has to be the backbone of reliability. Now, the Greens and the Teals both oppose new gas developments. That means the price of gas will be high. Gas in peak hours sets the wholesale price. That drives the price of electricity higher. So while they hold those positions, they're forcing up the price, the costs to consumers by holding these basically contradictory positions. Another thing too, how much primary energy consumption do you think is fossil fuel in Australia? Is it 60%? Is it 70%? No, it's 91% of all of our consumption, the things that we need to drive our society, like the oil that we use, all the things that we have around us that have fossil fuel embedded in its industrial production. The idea that you are going to cut that as rapidly as they think is actually preposterous, but it doesn't seem to matter. These numbers actually never get laughed out of court.
I want to ask you about another story. I think it's very significant. It's complex. It's not getting the airtime it should have. But we've got a whole lot of farmers and graziers in particular very concerned about perhaps changes to the definition of deforestation. What we have in Australia aligns with our laws at a state and federal level. But we're in the middle of negotiating or attempting to negotiate an EU FTA, free trade deal, and the push is on from the European Union for Australia to take their definition of deforestation. Now, we cannot have the EU dictating, surely, Chris, to our farmers.
No, we can't. And what we should look at is the fact that Queensland farmers in particular do have a lot of environmental laws. Now, you might make the argument that they should be a bit stiffer, but I'll tell you something that's not happening. And that's when it comes to wind farms in Queensland. I've been to northern Queensland, to the Atherton Tablelands, with a real environmentalist, Stephen Nowakowski, and seen where they've blasted off the top of mountains along the Great Dividing Range to put in wind turbines. And there's another thing that perhaps the EU should focus on. Do you know that one of the key ingredients in those wind turbine blades is balsa wood? So each of those 81 metre long rotors, and there are 3 of them, needs 40 balsa wood trees. So the forests of Ecuador, which provides 90% of the world's balsa wood, are being cleared for the wind farms of Europe and China. I think that's something that probably deserves a little bit more scrutiny.
Do you think part of the reason why the government now is so behind in the polls, I mean, consistently behind, it's absolutely on trend to lose its majority, is that people have finally woken up to the complexity of the renewables decision, that they're not just ticking a box to say, I care about the planet, that it has real life consequences for them at home and at work?
Yeah, I think if people begin to actually fully understand about the kind of electricity system, for example, that we intend to set out to build, 82% renewables. Now think about that, Peter. By their nature, this is a system where the backbone of generation will be off more often than it is on. The best return you're going to get on a wind farm is 40% of whatever's on the nameplate. Say 100 megawatts, well, then you can say it's 40. Solar, well, the sun goes down every night, it's 30%. You cannot fill the gaps that it leaves with things like batteries, and if you did, even that is desperately expensive power. It can only be filled by gas. Everywhere I've been around the world, the way that these systems run are backed up by gas. And not just, by the way, for the 82%, 100% of what you put in renewable energy must be backed up by something that's firm. And that something that's firm, whatever it will be costly. Then you have the transmission costs. Then you have the distribution costs. I don't think people have the foggiest idea about the kinds of costs which we are going to bake into the system, which will be baked into your bills. And if they ever do get that idea, they are not going to back this system.
That's why the left like to keep it complex. It's like they don't want to get into the detail, Chris. I'm looking forward to your documentary. I know that's coming soon. Chris Uhlmann, thank you.